Okay, hello everyone. This is our fifth meeting, and the plan for today is to not to discuss philosophical questions, but to discuss some other things. Like the first bunch of questions will be about general relativity and gravity, and how things like space and time would emerge and what entropy plays with it. Then we'll discuss something very different from what we did before. It's evolution of languages, and I think it is there's some connection with the discussion of other topics we had previously, but it will be interesting on itself. And then we're going to enter uncharted territory of discussing political systems, right? So, and that will be the third type of questions that we would be addressing. As usual, I'll read the question, tell you something a little bit about this, what I think the neural network theory tells you, and then we'll go around and see what other questions people have or ideas, and we'll try to go from there. Okay, so let's start with gravity. The first question in gravity that people would want to ask if they study gravity or general relativity, people know that space and time play a crucial role in there, unlike other forces of nature. And so the first question seems to appear is, how does space or space-time emerge in that picture? And so I propose we do the following Gedanken experiment. So before we get deep into the technicalities. So think about you are in a rocket, which is completely closed. There's like no windows, nothing. You don't see anything. And the only thing you receive is some signal. So you're just monitoring some signal that coming from the outside. Then you have to make contact, have to establish some channels of communication with other systems around you, which you think are actually emitting those signals. Now, what would you do, right? And so when I'm talking about this rocket, I'm really thinking about the fundamental neuron that maybe in the beginning of the maybe right after the Big Bang tried to establish communication with other neurons, really. But we don't have to go to we can still talk about rockets. And it tries to establish this contact. I think the first conjectural hypothesis this rocket or you and the rocket will have to do is say, well, let's assume that everybody else around is the same, right? So the simplest assumption that you always make, well, maybe I'm the model of anybody outside of you, which is not you. Maybe the simplest model is you. So everybody is just like you until it's proved wrong. And then you can start complicating things. And so that hypothetical person in the rocket would say, okay, well, all I can do is receive signals and maybe send some signals. So let me do that. Maybe first I receive signals that make no sense, and I'll just retransmit them, right? Or maybe I'll start changing the signals. And then if the other rocket does the same, what might happen, I will transmit a signal and I'll get the same signal right back. So I know that, there's somebody there, there's some other rocket there with which we've just established a connection. We just started to exchange minimal information, like I'm here and the other, person, the other rocket says I am there. And that's how this first connection, emergence of the first connection would take place. Then you would say, right, I want to filter everything else and just pay attention to that particular signal. And as evolution goes on, I already established one connection. I want to establish more connections. So I try to maybe use some other frequency, and on some other frequencies, again, transmit this information. So gradually, the idea is those neurons or rockets would start exchanging information and forming an emergent picture of some kind of space. Why? Because space would be a useful way of telling where you are and with whom you are communicating. And then in this picture, each rocket or each neuron is a separate learning system, but the connection that is established emerge from the desire of the individual subsystem or neurons or rockets to learn, to make sense of what is there. Now, of course, we are a very advanced learning system. We exchange information using light, photons, sound, and so we're way past that initial stage where you have to decide what's a useful way to transform information. But what may happen, like first you establish connection with one such rocket, or and then that rocket establish connection with something else, and so it's like a friend of a friend, and then you can maybe form chains of those rockets where information can just go back and forth, and then you would be making your mental picture of the space that isn't there, because this is how you are just interpreting, receiving, and transmitting information. And this is probably the easiest way that I could come up with to explain what does it mean for space to emerge, because there was not space there, but it appeared a useful bookkeeping device for you to send signals back and forth, like, indicating, look, I'm here, and they reply, yes, I'm here as well. Now that space, and so in this picture, time had to be there. So there isn't any space-time yet, and I'll tell you what it is later. But maybe there are some feedback or ideas or thoughts that you guys have about it. Maybe it makes sense, maybe it doesn't make sense. But the idea here that you want everything is emergent, so there isn't really that space that is there, and then on top of which you are trying to establish connections. The space is emergent in that picture. So any thoughts? You are too shy today. Okay, well, I know that gravity is complex, but bear with me. It will get more complex. So this is just space. We just had space emerged. So let me now move on to the speed of light here. Like, what does it mean? Now, technically, all those rockets or all those neurons can be connected with each other. There's no notion of locality. Everything can be connected with everything. And yet, if this space emerges, and then you decide to just pay attention to certain neurons, rockets that are close by, and that you decided to think about them as close by, and filter everything in, there is this speed of light, or maximal distance for which I can send signals. So I cannot send signals directly to everyone. So if I have to send it to someone, I have to go through the. You can think about this as like internet, right, of connections, right? But internet, where not every computer connected to everything, but there is some preferred channel of transmitting of information. And then there will be a preferred speed of light, with how you cannot immediately send signal to everyone, and there has to be some limiting speed of light. But again, I mean, I would like to hear your thoughts about emergent space-time, because I know it's physics, I know it's hard, but unless we try, I wouldn't know where the questions are.
So one question I have is, hypothetically, obviously the theory is still being developed and everything, but would the first neurons have existed perhaps prior to the Big Bang, and the Big Bang was just some way they reorganized themselves that gave rise to space-time, or are we thinking that the initial neurons arose after the Big Bang?
Yeah. So this is a question about neurogenesis of those neurons that form the space-time, right? When do the new neurons come and start becoming part of that emergent space? Well, originally there was no space, right? And I was like one lonely neuron trying to establish connections. Then I've established connection with one other neuron. So my local universe now consistent of two neurons. And then I say, look, guys, we already have a communication with two neurons. You can join in because everybody else who would join in would now get not some stochastic noise in their channels or input channels, but would get some coherence, right? So you you would see that there is some order in the network of those neurons that have been combined. So again, this is a really speculative idea, but the point here is that it is a beneficial, like if you have to make a choice, here is this universe where people are, where neurons are already communicating, they've already established three-dimensional space, and you are there on your own, and you have to make a choice. Do I just start forming my own collaboration without neurons, or I just merge in? And if you merge in, that is like neurogenesis. You now become a part of that early Big Bang of the universe, and then the neurons continue learning, right? And so, and as they learn, the more and more complicated structures will start forming. So one of the other way of thinking about gravity, now we're gradually moving from just space to gravity. Now, the way gravity is different from other forces, well, first of all, it's attractive, and secondly, it is the space-time that gives rise to gravitational force. And the one thing that comes with gravity that doesn't come with other forces is this violation of the second law, right? So usually, if you have particles in the corner of the room, and you start some dynamics, the particles will just spread out throughout the room, and entropy will increase, will be maximum. Well, that's not what happens with the gravitational particles. They kind of try to go towards one another, and then yes, at this point, the space is already established, but they are trying to learn more and more about each other, and so the way you can do it is just by getting closer. And so this attraction force comes from the desire of those particles, at least in this theory. Of course, I mean, we're just discussing one particular theory where the dynamics is described by neural networks. Then there is a tendency of the particles to get closer, for entropy to actually go down, not to increase, and things like that to happen. But the initial stage, Josh, to answer your question, is like in neurogenesis. And so Bobby can tell us more about neurogenesis, I guess, and tell how that happens in a real neural networks, right, Bobby? Okay.
Yeah, was that a prompt for me to chime in?
Yeah. I think like the whole point is here not to have one-sided discussion and people to jump in, because look, I have the language of physicists, right? And some things may not make sense for others, and so people should just chip in and tell other ideas that they have about that particular topic. Yeah.
Sure. And what was the question about neurogenesis?
Well, I mean, in this picture, as Josh pointed out, the neurons do not like start immediately all together communicating with one another, and they're mostly disconnected, or if there are connections, they're chaotic connections. But then they start merging coherent structures like space, and then more and more neurons join into those spaces. And so from the point of view of that emergent space of this universe, small universe, it looks as neurogenesis. More and more neurons start participating in the dynamics of this universe. That's why I call it neurogenesis, right? Moreover, there are more and more connections they're trying to establish, but coherent connections, because you may be able to have incoherent corrections like random, and then you would not be able to make sense of it. You wouldn't be able to, but here you are really trying to merge into the pre-existing network, which already has some structure. I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, Bobby, but
yeah, no, I mean, so neurogenesis occurs through Hebbian learning. So the kind of rule is what fires together, wires together. So you'll have an organism that has to survive. In physics terms, it has to stay out of thermodynamic equilibrium. So it has to keep its organized state. And to do that, it has to capture energy from the environment, because it needs energy to do work to maintain that organization. Right. So it has to create a model of the world. And the brain is really a network of little information processing units that are connecting to create a coherent picture of the world around you, so that the organism can navigate its environment successfully enough to survive. So it's interesting, Yeah, because I've been thinking about this as well, with your model of the universe being a neural network, but it's this microscopic neural network. So I wasn't sure if neurons in the brain are some sort of high level organization, basically, is it a higher level version of the microscopic neural network that's being built up from the components of the microscopic neural network? And in that sense, are neurons really not something fundamentally new, but just basically this a higher cluster of the microscopic neural network?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I mean, we discussed it in previous meetings, but let me repeat it. But the idea of this is that there is a hierarchy, right? And there are microscopic neural networks or neurons. They form, collaborations, and then you have some elementary particles built out of this. So last time we discussed fermions as some subnetworks of fundamental neurons that you get. Then you can form atoms, then you can form molecules, and it's all of this is just a higher and higher level of things that have essential features of microscopic neural networks. Having these two types of degrees of freedom. One is more stochastic, and one is more learning. One tries to increase the entropy, and it is in direct contact with the environment. And the other one is trying to decrease the entropy, trying to learn the environment. But coming back to my question now, but imagine that you do not have the environment, right? Or you're paralyzed, right? You just have your thoughts. Your eyes are closed. You have no senses, and yet you're still trying to make sense of it, of the environment. And then let's say all of a sudden you start receiving a signal, right? And that's what that's my model of the rocket, right? Really, you are not in a contact with the environment. The environment is cut out from you. The only information you get from the environment, this noise. There's some information flows in, and you're trying to make sense. And you notice that if you kind of, and you're trying to, you get the information, and you can also send out the information, right? In this game, and so basically what happens is you can notice that once you send out, like, let's say, some pulse, then the incoming signal also changed. So it's like you said, "I'm here," and somebody replied, "Oh, I'm here as well," right? And then they create a loop of information, and then a connection established. So I think you're right about neurogenesis happening when you want to learn more and more about the environment. But here, even if you are unsupervised, even if you are like closed within itself, and then there are just pieces inside that just doing the same learning, and those are like microscopic neurons, they would still be doing the same thing, right? They would still be trying to establish connections and make sense of those connections.
Would they be modeling the world?
As they, of course, absolutely, don't know, but they don't know how to start, right? So this is what interesting in this Gedanken experiment. You want to model the world, but you don't know where to start, because for now you're just receiving some signal, random signal, and you are sending out some signal, and so that's too much. So maybe the first thing you will do, you'll just filter out all information and concentrate on some frequency, like some channel, okay, and say, well, let me just make sense of this channel first, and like forget about anything else. And in fact, that's what we do. Humans we filter a lot of frequencies, a lot of information, and we just concentrate on some narrow band and saying, let's just try to make sense of it, and then gradually increase this band. And so that's what those microscopic neurons would do initially. And the more they learn, the more coherent structures they form together, because they understand it's useful to collaborate. Not me, one neuron model everything, but I know what other person knows, right? So then I don't need to really know everything about the universe, but I know whom to ask. And that's what this, emergent space. Yes, I do not know everything about the entire space, but I know that that other neuron that I've contacted knows something more, and so I can send a signal, get it back, or send a signal and see when it comes back. And by that, I kind of measure the spectral properties of the space, and then I can make my mental model of the space. But it's emergent. It isn't. It is just because all other rockets, all other neurons decided that it's useful to learn. Donald, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes, relating to that, with this modeling and stuff, I know that like back in like 100 years ago, some of the prisons had some pretty extensive solitary confinement where people weren't allowed any sensory, and they had a lot of trouble with quote madness and psychiatric problems with those people. And I was wondering that. And then there was also, like in the 60s, there was a lot of sensory deprivation tank experiments done and stuff. And how does that all relate to this?
Yeah, that's
I have a comment on that as well.
go ahead, Josh.
And there's also those experiments that they're horrible. I mean, they weren't experiments, they call them case studies, but where like people locked their kids away. And basically what it shows is that like your brain really needs interaction to basically function properly. Which makes sense, but kind of to bring that to what we're talking about right now, basically, it's almost like consciousness is there's something about consciousness where the social part of it is key. I don't know how much, or like if it's like a scale, but it seems that like there's something about consciousness that it is about finding that other neuron to connect with, and then establishing that connection, and then combining forces to form more connections. There's something social about it. I know it's obvious, but
we'll get to social, Josh. Don't rush. But that is true. That's a good analogy, right? But I think the main point here is that despite of being actually connected to all other neurons, it is a disadvantage to you to start communicating with all of them at the same time. So really, the strategy here first is make an assumption that other neurons, other rockets, other subsystems are the same way as I am. The first assumption. And the second assumption is let me filter most and like start building connections one by one. And then that's what, you filter information and then you start learning little by little. And then you add more of the connection that you can establish. So apparently we humans can only observe a very narrow band of frequency, light frequency, right? And so there are very few connections that we can establish. But those connections are essential for us as an organism to evolve, and it is essential establishing those connections. Not too many, but one by one, it was essential for the universe to actually grow its space, but the space would have been emergent. Okay, so now let me move on to the next question. There is actually a long discussion can be about the space-time component to this, and it's a very special symmetry. So I will skip it for now, but I will remember to go back to that in the future when we discuss more of the Lorentz invariant field theories, whatever. So now let me go back to the entropy question, because entropy seems to be important and it is related to what I just said. When you see all this mass of information coming to you, this is a highly entropic state. There's too much entropy in the environment. And so you cannot make sense of it just because you don't have enough internal degrees of freedom to model everything. So what you do, you cut off this information, you remove it. And in the language of physics, or modeling, you're coarse graining. You're coarse graining information that you decided that is irrelevant. And you only concentrate on the relevant information. And so this removing of entropy, just filtering it, is essential. And so because of that, the connections can be established because you managed to filter it. And that's learning. Learning when you decrease the entropy and you start to be more and more predictable. And when those rockets start behave more predictable, when they start emitting signals that are more and more coherent, that is the time when the connections are established in this system, space-time system can grow and become richer and richer. And so, yes, in this sense, gravity has the entropic origin, and it is the two tendencies. But there are two tendencies to the dynamics of entropy. One tendency, if you don't learn, entropy just grows. And that's what happens when the no learning dynamics takes place. It's a second law of thermodynamics. And the other tendency is to decrease this entropy, and then the opposite effect happens. Entropy decreases, things start to cluster. And so when you see gravitational systems cluster, it's really there. And if in the language of learning, they're learning each other, right? So they're trying to make more and more sense of each other. They're trying to decrease entropy. At this positional entropy, they're now occupying a smaller and smaller volume. That is the kind of the tendency in the learning system. I know that gravity is hard. I know all this is maybe something you're not used to discussing, but I think it is a useful question because, okay, how did this whole thing start? You know, we have this neural network learning dynamics, by where does the Big Bang come from? And so here in this picture, Big Bang is this initial desire of individual neurons to learn and communicate with each other and form coherent structures that can perform more and more complex observations and calculations. Other questions, comments? Okay, as usual, we start with something hard, then we move, well, physics, hard, it's subjective. And now we move to something that everybody has opinion about, right? And then even more so when we go to politics. So when we go to, the last section will be politics, the next one will be languages. And the reason why I want to talk about languages, because it is very similar to the discussion we just had. When the two neurons started talking to each other, they came up with the language of how to exchange ideas. That is a very primitive language. Maybe, I'm sending you information about my location in my emergent space, how I decided to call. I'm going to call my address 0. So the other neuron sends me back and says, well, okay, I'll be 1 then. And then the third says I'll be 2. And so, and then constantly they will be emitting this information once in a while about their location. So that's a very primitive language, which has no depth to it. Now, when we are actually talking about languages people use, languages must be more advanced. And that is because we already evolved neurons where we already have lots of other ways of communicating without languages, right? So we have eyes, we have ears, we can hear, we can see, and that's all good way of communication. But now we want to push it into the higher level of complexity. We want to be able to communicate and establish connections and tell you more about what we know, right? Remember when I said you have those neurons? The reason I want to establish connection with other neurons, because I don't want to store all the information about the universe around me within myself. I want to know sometimes who to ask, right? So, and the same thing happens with languages when we establish, when the language emerges, is basically because now instead of having to rediscover everything from scratch, we can just ask the right person what he or she knows about such and such a phenomena and effect. And then that simplifies our learning. We do not have to rediscover everything from scratch. We don't have to, rediscover the wheel and things like that. So then the emergence of languages is just emergence of a communication channel between humans, which has a lot more complexity in it. So now a lot more information can be transmitted from one human to another. And I think this language is just one of those channels. Now there are others, like for example, art, right? So different people may share their they may have share their preferences towards art, and then they can both express it because of whatever the experience they had before, and that already builds in their platform on which they can start communicating. They can now use certain short-term notations for some complex phenomena that they've both agreed on. Right now, we are doing something similar. When within this group, we are trying to form understanding of how things work, we are establishing a language. A new language, the only difference with this language, it's a language of modeling things. Like we are saying, okay, here's a language of learning of neural networks, and that can be used to form ideas, to discuss ideas. And so in this case, we are now doing creating at a higher level a language. But I think if we just go back to the questions, what and how do averages evolve? I think they form and evolve because of our desire to communicate complex pieces of information using shorthand notations, right? So that we do not have to rediscover them ourselves. So I want to hear, what your thoughts are about this, and yeah, everybody should have an opinion about how languages emerge and evolve.
I do feel like there's something key between language and consciousness. Like there's some connection that makes them inseparable. I'm not sure how.
No, complexity, Josh, you're absolutely right. That's complexity, right? So as we are able to establish more complex levels of communication, right? I tell you a few words. I don't know. I talk to a physicist. I say we are now going to use Hamiltonian mechanics. Okay, I've used I don't know, a handful of words for that. Yet the meaning of this is can be explained by going to school and studying for 4 years, studying physics for 4 years. So I've been able to compress a very complex idea within the few words, and for that I needed the other person to know what's a Hamiltonian mechanics and what it means that we are going to construct a theory. And then the same, but it can happen on different levels, right? So I can tell you, something that we say all the time. This I went to the forest and I saw a beautiful flower there, right? And it's very short sentence and contains a lot of meaning. Where now you can actually picture what happened and transmit this information to me much more efficiently. So this is just a way of creating. Enhancing the communication channel, creating more and more the bandwidth, increasing the bandwidth of communications between people or between sub networks, as was discussed. And so that's why once you have languages, this is important. Now, languages is not yet a recording of those languages. So another level, you can have languages, you can have, and they are kind of recorded. Passed from generation to generation, so that's how it's recorded. But then you can create even a better recording system. You can start writing books, and then have a library, and then that's how languages would evolve. Okay, Donald, sorry, I missed your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the interesting things was some of the experiments they've done with the different languages in terms of environmental interpretations depending upon language. Like different languages, people cognitively see the environment differently. Mm-hmm. And the translation between the groups is sometimes different. For instance, like colors, certain languages, certain areas of the world have, like they were talking about in Africa, there was a tribe that has like 18 words for green or something like that. And they can perceive green levels at much finer detail than the rest of us.
Yeah, perfect.
And stuff like that.
Perfect. Thank you, Donald. This is a great illustration of this idea that we still have to decide what to filter and what to actually learn. And different neurons, different subsystems can decide it differently. So this tribe you discussed decided to zoom in and concentrate on the green color because it was apparently important for their survival, for the environment. Maybe different shades of green were important. And so we constantly have to make this decision of what to filter and what to learn. And language just is again making this decision what to filter and what to learn, but on a high level. So that's all I think there is. And so the emergence of languages is unavoidable on the high levels. And the higher and higher complexity or depth of words, creation of them is also unavoidable. This is a natural tendency. So first, you may be okay with a very few words, and then more and more words would have to be created to describe more and more complex information compactly. So this is just a way of communicating. And I think art is also part of it because it is just even more complex than just languages. So, but yet you can probably communicate more ideas. And so we will discuss art in a separate session, but that will be also covered. Any other thoughts on ideas? And so then it brings a question that I don't want to answer myself first. I want to hear your reaction to that. Should we control evolution of languages, or should it be uncontrolled? So in particular, should we preserve endangered languages or and diversity, or should we just let it go? So any thoughts on that?
I think that the question, should we control the evolution, is, I don't know if the person who asked the question is here, maybe could clarify, but I don't quite understand how can we control the evolution. I don't think it's who will control.
No, I think the question is about like on the society level, right? So we can decide not to teach French ever in any of the universities, schools, because maybe English language is better. Nothing against French, but I mean, people can make such a decision, and that would be controlling, right? Making or maybe maybe not like prohibiting speaking French, but just not supporting it enough. And then it's not, I don't know why I said French, but any other language, right? So there are languages that are spoken by a small group of people. And then if you do not actually make attempts to save those languages, they will eventually disappear. You do make special schools and stuff. And so you can certainly, at the level of society, decide one or another. And that would be controlling the evolution of languages. Now is it, or let's say like okay, Alex, you had a thought. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I think it makes sense to replace the language with species or animals and ask the same question. Should we control the evolution of other species? And so, because I'm not sure that it's a big difference there. Yeah. And actually, we know a lot of languages which not exist right now, and we don't know how many will appear in future. Yeah. And so I think it's a similar sense there.
So I think I will agree with you that they're related, but in the level of neural network, controlling languages is like controlling weights and communication channels, allowing them to be specific or more broad. And there is a balance, right? So you make the bandwidth larger, but then you have to process information. So it's about connections. And when you're saying controlling the animals, it's like controlling the nodes, right? Do you want to have different types of nodes, or do you want to have different types of connections? And I think there is a balance, right? So I mean, both extremes are bad. Yes. So if we just say, go ahead.
One additional note about the control. I think that from point of view of control makes sense to say that we can control everything we created. So, and if we created, for example, some language or something else, I think it's maybe true that we can we have a right to control it. If we create it, we can eliminate it, etc. But if something appeared without our efforts, I think from ethic point of view, it's not a good way to stop
it. Okay, Alex, we're not moving to ethics today. Ethics was the point where we all started fighting last
ethics week. Is banned.
Yeah. But I think when we ask this question is the point of view of the learning theory. I think usually we mean, right? So we want this whole society or biosphere or whatever to be more efficient in learning, right? To learn more and more, and then you have to make a choice. What is better, to preserve diversity, or to actually concentrate on few languages and make them perfect? And where's the balance, right? Should you just have one language, or should you have a million languages? With a million languages, there'll be less of the clarity in the communication between subsystems, because let's say there's a million languages, so there is an average million people speak each language, and so the thing is not functioning as a joint network, not as efficiently as it could. Now, if you only have one language, that there are maybe some terms that are not captured there, and then they were captured in some other languages that die. So I think both extremes are bad. Having just one language is bad. Having a lot of languages is also not ideal from the point of view of evolution. And yet there has to be some kind of middle ground. Katya, you raised your hand, so you have to.
I want to note that there are investigations about the interconnection between the languages and the natural diversity in some certain areas where some indigenous people live. So their languages connect, as already it was already also mentioned by Donald. It's a similar thing, I think, that their languages describe the environment they were living in, and also it is a kind of framework how to manage the sustainability of this environment. And there is a correlation between the disappearance of such languages and disappearance of natural diversity in these areas. Mm-hmm. So maybe it means that we, as you noted about deleting some nodes from the system, mm-hmm. Maybe it is this kind of thing. If we delete some, if we again, anyway, I don't know exactly how we can control it, because this phenomena with the disappearing languages, it is related to other processes, political actually. Mm-hmm. So there are problems.
Yeah, we'll
there
get
are
to
problems with these people, with their languages, and so and finally with ecological issues. So
yeah, I completely agree with that. And just to add one thing, I think it would clarify the conversation if we distinguished between like preserve versus like utilize. Like I think it makes sense to preserve to any extent we can all like the languages that we can discover for the reason that Katya just mentioned, because those languages are basically like the humans' best attempts to model that world that they lived in. And whether that world exists anymore or whether it's in the past, there's some knowledge and some information to be gained by learning how any group of people learn to model their particular environment at any given point in time. And so in that sense, preserving the language makes a lot of sense. But as far as utilizing as many languages as possible, obviously I think like as an engineer, I just want one language, but that's completely besides the point. So I do think it's got to be somewhere in the middle. One's probably not ultimately the best, because then you wouldn't get any like evolution or diversity or interplay between the two. So it's probably a multitude, probably more than one, but definitely not like a bunch. But that's for utilization, and I think we should preserve as many as we can. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, well,
yeah, I would agree with that, and important. But still, the question is how we can make this kind of conservation of natural system, of language system, of these native people. So that's the question, actually.
But the big question: do we need it, right? So, but I agree with Josh that like since those languages were developed and they proved to be useful way of communicating within their societies, and we kind of know about this, we should remember that, right? So whenever we next time see that there is some similar type of communication is needed, we don't have to reinvent it. We can just reuse something that was there. So the more we preserve, meaning the better pool of possible languages we have to utilize them for, down the way when we decide that something like that is useful. So I agree with that, but again, I mean, there has to be some kind of a policy imposed of what should be done, right? And and why, right? So we are not just going to, and the same for species, right? Do we preserve species or not? If we preserve it, why we need to preserve it? How much resources are used for preserving them? Maybe it doesn't worth it, and then we can decide how to better to stream the resources. Yeah, so it's a good point.
But what are the grounds how we decide? Should we do we need to preserve or not?
No, I think the cheap way of doing it is just to remember all of those, right? So we can record all the languages and kind of have a system of, if needed, employing them. So remember we talked about kind of parasites in biological system. You can have a parasite that is kind of draining resources of the host, and yet at some point this parasite may turn out to be useful to the host, and you can actually make it hire it, right, to do useful tasks. And the same here, you can have some subsystem or some languages that are not really useful from the point of view of the bigger system is developing. It may be draining some resources, but yet it's okay because it doesn't cost too much. You can kind of leave it there, and then at some point decide, okay, well, actually it is useful. Let's make use of it and let's employ it. Yaroslav, go ahead.
Yeah, and want just to ask, what about natural selection here? Maybe if something is dying, maybe it's just losing the natural selection, and it's just not the efficient way.
Yeah,
like not efficient language.
right. So the natural selection would actually, if we don't do anything, all those languages would die. And then the question is whether this is beneficial from the point of view. We are smarter now, right? So with the natural selection, it's just brute force. Basically, you didn't survive, we're not going to help you, so you die. And then you shouldn't be actually treating anyone with a medicine also, because it's why just lets the weaker people die. So I don't think this is the right approach, because we have already this in the higher level of the development of society, where we can kind of figure out whether it will be useful, not just right now, but in the future. Katya, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can agree with this. The idea of such kind of things maybe draining resources and are not useful. I don't see that we can have a really good judgment on these kind of things. We are constantly modifying the natural environment. And so far, we can see that our modifications don't work really well. We are just breaking a lot of things we just don't understand.
Well, we are increasing the temperature, biological temperature, very suddenly. We change the rules of the game, the temperature goes up, and we do not know whether this will, in the long run, be beneficial or not. And so I think the idea here is not to do sudden changes, right? So not suddenly kill all the languages but one, or suddenly kill all the species by one. We know that this is not going to be so, but maybe we can monitor gradual changes and then see how they affect the dynamics of the system. But some things my argument is some things, even if they're draining resources a little bit, we should just preserve them just in case, because recreating them would be much costly, and that applies to organisms. This applies to languages and other things. Donald, go ahead.
Hold on. Yeah, one of the things like the climate change thing, we have kind of are experimenting the same way with language as well, because I mean, I'm here in the United States. English through business, through computers, through like YouTube and all these online activities. We kind of started it. We were the biggest. So it's kind of, in a lot of ways, English has become the language of commerce throughout the world. And it is putting stress on other languages. There's a entertainer on Twitch that I watch that plays video games. And I thought he was from the States because he spoke such US based English, but he's not. He's from the Netherlands, and he learned it all by watching cartoons, he said, as a kid. So he picks up all of our slang. It's only once in a while that a little bit of the Dutch inflection comes in on a couple of words. So we're kind of doing the same thing with language that we're doing with the environment in terms of raising the temperature. We have put a lot of pressure on the world that English is becoming the de facto go-to between dissimilar groups, because most countries, people there know a little bit of English because it has become such a big thing. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that that's an observation similar to climate change. We're experimenting here by kind of pressuring the world into English for good or for bad,
Yeah. So my claim would be that there has to be hierarchy of languages. There may be one main one today, maybe it's English, but there has to be others, because the others may have some, words, terms, communication ideas that are more useful, and so those languages can make new ideas evolve, which otherwise would take much longer in English to evolve. And so keeping those around and having actually preserving languages is good. But I wouldn't argue that the more the merrier. So that's not probably you should not, if it drains too much resources to preserve a given language, I wouldn't think it's beneficial from that point of view. But yeah, I hear you. But let me just move on to the other thing, because it's maybe related. Phase transitions, right? So again, there are different languages that are very primitive, that people I don't know, 6,000 years ago spoke with, when there hardly were any words we're using now, but they did speak, right? And then more and more evolved languages came around, and these languages underwent to many phase transitions. So the language of mathematics was formed, for example, very useful language, language of communicating ideas that allowed us to actually make a progress in science in the last thousands of years. Now, and then there are more and more languages forming. For example, let's take physics. There is a language of classical mechanics that was formed. Then there is a language of quantum mechanics was formed. And those are higher and higher levels of languages, and we are constantly undergoing this phase transition, creating more and more. And if we just concentrate only on diversity, and there will be just many languages, those phase transition would never take place. You really need a critical number of ideas, people working within one language, understanding each other in order for new terms, new ideas to be formed. And so by keeping the diversity, we kind of pump in entropy into the system, and that is not allowing it to learn. But by concentrating on the one language, we may just reach a local equilibrium, and this system will stop learning. So both things are bad. Like one language is like zero temperature limit, many languages like infinite temperature limit, temperature in terms of at this level in the multi-level learning. And so both things are bad. And there has to be a balance. You should not have too many languages, but the number has to be large and has to be evolving. And there should be, at the same time, languages that develop so well that they allow us to create new ideas and increase the complexity of what we're communicating. Because without that, right now we are doing exactly that. We are trying to create a language of learning as a new language of communicating ideas. And so that uses all of what we had before, but it's a higher level. And so whether we are able to make this transition determines whether we are able to establish communication between us using this set of formulas, ideas, etc. Other questions, comments? All right. So let's see. Alex, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. Just thinking. You just described, you started from gravity, and right now you're talking about the languages, and I think what about? For example, imagine we have a space of actors which live in one informational space, and nobody understands each other. Yes, so if they're using a different languages, they can't communicate. For example, appear two languages. And so we split this space on two sides. So one people can communicate with each other, another one can communicate with each other in different languages. And so it's a kind of force actually on this space. Yes, so when we have diversity of the languages, it works like a force on this space. And so when we have, when new languages appear, they works like a gravity, because all actors, for them it's possible to communicate with each other. And so it seems like this kind of analogy here.
No, that's perfect, because this is exactly how it works. But so there are two forces. When you create lots of languages, they actually go apart from one another. They live separately. And if the actors or subsystem decide that they actually should collaborate, they form some channels of communication. That's like attraction. So they're saying, okay, well, maybe there was English language, there's Chinese language, but it maybe there are many things that we can exchange, many ideas. And so let's combine, let's create a dictionary, let's say, to translate from one language to another. That's one step, right? So actually, it's the simplest one to do. So if you have one language and the other language, and you have ideas in one language and the other, the first thing you should do is just to come up with the dictionary of how to translate with one set of ideas to another. That's already first step. It doesn't mean that it will now you will be able to transform all of the ideas from one to another, because as we said, there may be something unique to the language. Like example that Donald gave with the many shades of green that we are not able to distinguish, but may be important for some learning tasks. And so yeah, this is why I wanted to talk about languages after gravity, because gravity or space-time is establishing languages at its primitive states, the first languages, like 0, 1. I am here, I am also here, right? But then it evolves, and you're saying, well, where you are, what do you know about your neighbors? And then there's more and more, languages become more and more advanced. But then we run out of things to do within just explaining the locations, and you start thinking about more advanced informations to be exchanged, right? So I know that if I walk off the cliff, I will die. I've seen a person done that. So you're going to go and tell that this is a dangerous behavior. Nobody needs to repeat it for themselves to go, off the cliff and die, or something else. If a rock flies your direction, it's dangerous. You better catch it. The one way is to learn by yourself. First, have the rock hit you, and then you figure out that that's not a good idea. Or somebody tells you, well, if you see that the rock flies towards you, try to avoid collision with this. Again, language, and then it goes on, and the last question was about phase transition. But the phase transition is exactly that, when you realize that the current language just doesn't have enough to explain certain higher level phenomena. And so, like in mathematics, right? So you need the language of mathematics to decide something. And so mathematics was created. And then there are branches of mathematics like classical physics, quantum physics, had created because there are certain things you just couldn't describe using the English language that existed before. And as more and more phenomena we discover, the language, the higher and higher languages being formed. The problem is that to communicate in these languages and learning them becomes harder for people, right? So, it takes years to learn physics or mathematics to a certain degree. And so having more and more people learning those high level languages is beneficial for the evolution of the entire system. And now, so maybe Alex, I will also steal your idea about this creating, subgroups of different languages by describing exactly what happens in science right now. We have groups of physicists who have their own language of communicating. We have groups of biologists. They use their language of communications. Psychologists, philosophers, artists, and they don't understand each other. Okay, so the language that they use in between themselves are just not enough to be able to communicate. And so the first step that we are trying to do here is to rewrite the ideas that are written in one group to the others. So create this communication channel. And once that's created, you can actually make the space transition and start forming universal ideas that can be redistributed along those groups. And so that's kind of the idea. Other questions, comments? Okay, yes, Alex, of course.
Yeah, for some follow-up on this. Okay, the sense of different languages is that if two persons talking on different languages, they can communicate with each other. It's so definition why we're talking that it's a different languages. Okay, and when appears the translation from one language to another, actually it appears the union of these languages, because all these languages became actually possible. They equivalent they became equivalent because if you have a translation, actually,
Alex, not union, intersection. Not union.
Yeah, you're right. Intersection.
Union is the interesting part, but dictionary is just intersection. You only translate terms that exist in the other languages.
Yeah, I'm talking in a final stage in limits. So yeah, it's became we aim to achieve this goal. Yeah, and from this point of view, actually, the nature talking with us on its own language. We calling it as a physics laws. Yes. And so each communication usually is trying to understand language you don't know. And so actually we communicate in our society with each other, trying to combine this union. Yeah, we started from intersection and then trying to achieve the union. And
Exactly.
from point of view of evolution of humanity, yeah, we actually trying to understand the language of nature. Yes, we're trying to study the physics law. We're trying to understand this, maybe mathematics, physics, literature, art.
Not everyone needs that, right?
You
So
think?
some people try to understand, like, so for some people, and people have different tools with which they understand the nature, right? So I want to write down equations. Other people want to write down, poems, maybe create art, and there are different ways of how people would like to learn the nature. I think what's missing is the translation, right? So between that, even like think about different religions, right? So there are many religions, and people who thought about how the universe worked, they use different tools. What I use, they don't use mathematics, but they have results. The results, or maybe their own experiences, that suggest that the universe works such and such way. So what's missing is for it to be translated into the language, some common language, like language of the theory of learning, where I would know exactly what you're saying. I may agree, disagree, that's secondary. Okay, agreeing, disagreeing is secondary, but the first is how to translate the ideas from one another, and it is a language. It is just the language that we are trying to establish. The language which actually create a union, like you say, a union of all separate types of people with different backgrounds. Katya, you're raising your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm just continuing what you already started to say, that maybe we are talking about levels of complexity here. Our knowledge of the world is increasing, and we need to more and more complex language to describe it. So, and there are some levels like Zoom. If on one hand, we need some unified language to have some general common understanding and interconnections between the different fields. But at the point when you need distinction of various shades of green, you need some some specific language to go deeper in this. Or maybe another example is, for example, any field like arts, for example. People who are in arts, investigating and provide some investigations within this field, they will develop more complex language that to talk about it, to develop the knowledge that is not needed to the person who investigates something different. So it's like when we come close to some kind of specific knowledge, we need some specific language to describe it, and we need some.
So the only thing I would disagree with, it's not necessarily we don't need it. We haven't tried. So maybe there is some group, like let's say artists, develop some slang or some ideas, right? And it's useful for them.
No, don't need. I mean, we cannot just. It's from the point of view of limited resources. You can't devote yourself to.
No. Yes. But I want to be able to have like a summary, right? But that's missing right now. So I cannot easily translate, and moreover, I cannot easily translate ideas from one branch to another. Moreover, I'll say the thing that I know to exist, let's say mathematical physics, the very same idea rediscovered in different branches and goes by different names. And so even, and many years passed, and just people in different branches would call the very same thing using different names. And it's very hard with this setup to translate ideas that were generated in one group to another. And that's what we are trying to overcome. And that's what Alex says, merging language, creating a union.
Exactly. I'm talking about the same. So we are agreeing.
Yes. Oh, okay, good. I think we are agreeing. Yeah. Donald, go ahead. You had.
Yeah, I think what she was referring to is something that I've had happen myself, and I've seen other examples of. My ex was Jamaican, and she talked a lot with her family back home. And after a while, I started to really learn a lot of the terms of their patois, which is a derivative of English and African languages mixed together, a little bit of Spanish thrown in. And it's very unique. And speaking with her family was very hard when I met her. But over time, it got to where I understood terms and stuff like that. But now we've been apart 8 to 10 years, even though my current significant other is also Jamaican. She doesn't speak
there seems to be connection problem, or is it?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Okay.
But
I
so
was saying that now
Maybe if you
the
switch off your
retention
camera,
of
it would be
that
better.
language that I learned isn't there because this.
yeah, Donald,
Okay.
let's just hold on this
Are
thought.
you getting any better signal?
Okay,
Yep.
let's try it again.
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Basically it was, I learned a language from hearing it and speaking it
Mhm.
with my ex and her family.
Mhm.
Now it's not a completely different language, but it is derivative enough that over time, since we've been apart and I haven't been doing it, now when I hear it, it takes much more effort for me to understand it.
Mhm.
And I can't speak it anymore like I used to be able to. I don't remember it because going back to your thing, it's the resources to keep it maintained were more, I didn't want to devote the time and the effort to maintain it. So it's fallen away. And another example was a documentary I saw about a park ranger in Florida who was raising a group of turkeys that had lost the parents. And he, over time, was expressing over 2 years of raising these turkeys that he started to understand their language, their different little ticks that they made. And he goes, they are so observant of their environment that he was able to see. He goes, normally you walk through the woods with them and I'd see like 2-3 snakes. He goes, walking with them, he goes, I'd see 300 because I started to learn when they, their various things. Oh, there's a snake over there. He goes, just from being around them, you start to pick this up in language. He goes, once they were done and he had to release them all out back into the wild, once they grew to adulthood, he goes, I walk back through the same space. I don't see the snakes anymore.
Okay.
Because he just doesn't have that perception because he doesn't understand that language anymore.
Thank you, Don. I think this is those two examples are more relevant to psychology level, right? Where you,
Okay.
the person, decide what's more useful and what less useful
Right.
at different points of time, and that evolves, right?
Mhm.
That's a different level. We'll talk about this more. Definitely. Now, at the level of language, it's like something that we not. It's a social level, right? So, what is the better way of communicating at the social level when we are effective neurons trying to, create connections more efficiently? For example, now we have an internet. That's also a language in a way because there are protocols, and when we over those protocols, we speak English or any other languages, but this is a channel of communication that we have created. And then, is it good or bad? Well, first, it doesn't seem to be like a great idea. We can all exchange ideas, like at the same time, create lots of connections. Look how many Facebook friends you all of a sudden have, right? You've never had so many friends at any moment of time before internet. Now, is it useful? Well, it seems useful, but then there is a problem with the entropy because too many connections is also not very good because you cannot really devote enough time with each of you Facebook friend, and you cannot really make those connections useful from the point of view of the learning theory. And so languages, I think we can have this a bigger notion. It's like all possible way of communicating, which is beyond hearing and seeing, right? All possible ways of communication. Those are all languages. And the harder part is actually creating higher level languages, making this forced transition. But I claim it's impossible if we do not keep lots of lower level languages. And that diversity is also important. Okay, very good. Let's move on. We're to the part of this meeting where we will all disagree. So this is politics, right? Whoever agrees on politics, never. Nevertheless, I think we are prepared to discuss those questions. So political systems are a slice of the social systems and there's things that we already discussed at the level of social systems may be applicable for us to understand what is it that we want from a political system. What is the ideal one, how it should evolve, and things like that. So let me start with the first question, and then I will tell you what I think about this, and we'll go on to other systems. So the ultimate goal is to understand what would be the best political system. Where are we going wrong? You always hear, that this system is bad, that this system is bad, but how can we make it better from the point of view of the learning system? So the first question is, what are the pros and cons of the existing political systems? And the things that are listed here are democracies, oligarchies, monarchies, authoritarian, and totalitarian regimes. Okay, so I mean, we are not politicians, we are not in political science, yet we can think about this as a learning system. So we have a given, government, country, a collection of people that decided to create their own policies, how to live and evolve. And then some group decided, well, we're going to use democracy. There are no perfect democracies, and there are all the problems that come with it, but yet that's the approach. That is the mindset. Let's just have all people have equal rights in decision making. This is not how it works, but again, those are just obstacles that we have to deal with. And then the other approaches where it was more, so that here you kind of have equality, like, everybody has the right, the same contribution, the same weight to make a decision, ideally. And the oligarchies are a group of people. So it's now you go from everybody making decision to a smaller group of people that are distinct from everybody else by the amount of money they have in their businesses. And then you go to even smaller decision-making subsystem like totalitarian regime or monarchies. And so those are the three possibilities, three scales. The claim is that none of them are good because they're too sharp of a cutoff. So democracy is not good because it just treats everybody equally, and yet it's the best we have. Don't get me wrong. This is the best we have, but it is not good in the sense that not everybody who is a better learning system or is contributing is able to contribute the most to such a political system. So perhaps you can have people who are more educated and smarter, and one would think, okay, maybe they should contribute more. And then the ones who are just not smart at all and they don't care about anything, why they should be having the vote at all. And then that's one approach. But the other approach is about why the totalitarian or authoritarian regimes are bad, because you just have very few people who are making the decision. So now let's look at all this thing from the point of view of the learning theory. And the very basic measure of how good a given system is how many trainable variables there are. How much is it able to adapt to the changes in the environment and create new things. So it seems like the totalitarian is the worst, or authoritarian. There's very few degrees of freedom. There's very tiny number of things that matter. There's maybe one person who makes all the decisions. It seems like to be horrible it's like, imagine you have your body and there's one neuron and that's it. And the neuron tells everybody what to do. And there's doesn't say, it's the only degree of freedom that is relevant, that is making any change. Seems like a horrible idea, but at the same time, democracy is not good from the point of view of the organism, because in democracy, all cells would be exactly the same, would be doing exactly the same thing. And you know that that's not beneficial. You want to have some cells that are responsible for keeping the body working. The other neurons are responsible for you to making the decisions, and there seems to be a diversity of responsibilities that has to be and within the learning system like organism. Okay, so your thoughts about various existing. So we are not now yet creating a new system. We're just saying, well, those are the ones that we have. Your pros and cons about the existing ones. What are your thoughts? Nobody wants to speak about politics. Wow.
Hello.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah. my thoughts would be on it that the totalitarian system works moderately well in a very small primitive society,
Mhm.
because one person can handle the day-to-day things that are going to come up. As a society gets larger and more complex, there's too much decision making to put into one person.
Mhm.
They either have to pull back and become very like make proclamations that are generalizations to follow, and that's all they're going to do, but they cannot maintain a strict control of every little segment of society because it's just too much information coming in for them to deal with and be able to counter.
That's
Democracy works better, I would say, on a more complex society because things are more spread around. And I don't necessarily agree that with democracy, you're saying that everything is the same. That almost sounds more like the idealistic description of where communism wanted to head to where everybody is equal, everybody has a commonality. Democracy, I would say more of, is a bit more where you can have different groups, but they all have equal ability to maybe affect the system, but they don't have to necessarily be the same in doing the same things.
so of course I'm oversimplifying.
Okay, yeah, and so that would tend to work a little better on a complex system, but then the downside is it's also very complex on its own, and it can be slow to respond to things as opposed to a single authoritarian figure. If suddenly there's an attack to the system, a single person, if they get it right, would be much quicker and more responsive, but they got a higher chance of getting it wrong, where a large group of decision makers bouncing ideas back and forth would be more likely come up with the correct solution, but take longer to do it, and maybe take too long to accomplish the decision.
Okay, thank you, Don. Alex, I'm going to give you a word in a second. Let me just bring, because of what Donald said, I want to bring one more term into this consideration, which Donald implied but didn't say. It's a time scale. So it depends on when you ask for how long you're going to monitor your political system. Now, what Donald said that if your time scale is short, then totalitarian seems to work well. And then if the time scale is longer, then eventually it will fail. And so he attached it to the complexity of the system, to the size of the system, and that's one scale, size of the system. And the other scale is a time scale. When do you want to check whether your system worked well or not well? And I think those two extremes are the ones, the totalitarian would work better on the short time scale, but not on the long time scale. Okay, Alex, go ahead. You're next.
Okay, thank you. As we're talking about the political system, I think here maybe such kind of analogy. The political system for society, it's a kind of crystal cells for the matter, because actually it's something which makes it stable in a long term. And so when we're talking about the political system, always it makes sense to talk and to mean what kind of matter, what kind of society we have, which other characteristics there, because a lot of parameters define which political system at the moment is better for actually even for the same society. And so for example, if we're talking about the current world in different parts of our planet, this answer may be different. And so I think it's not correct to say this one is better and this one is worse. Yes, okay. It's very depends. It's
so Alex, it's a great idea, and I think it's correct. So what you are talking about, I think, is that at different stages in the development of every society, different political systems may be beneficial. So for, let's say, less advanced society where all more primitive people are, maybe having a single person controlling everything is to its benefit. But as the society develops, and as we already said, undergoes phase transition, it has a more layerness in its complexity and its structures than having a single node kind of in the case of neural networks connected to everything else, and decision of that node changes everything is not a good idea. So there are three now considerations: the size of the system, how developed it is, so how small the loss function of the system, and then what are the time scales on which you are considering the system. So those are physical size, time scales, and then complexity. So those are the three things I think would be important to. Alex, you wanted to add?
Last moment here. We're talking about the stable structures because only stable structures allow to evolve the system on a long term. If you have a lot of chances, quite different to evolve something stable. And if we're talking about the evolution is always about a survival of something stable.
Yeah.
And so
not stable, quasi-stable. So all those systems, none of them will be stable. So it's just like organism. Every organism will die. Every system will die.
Yeah, but species is stable. Organism, yes, but speech, the element of the evolution is not only the individual organism, but species. Yes.
But even the species can die out. So nothing is stable. So everything is quasi-stable. So it's like stable for some period of time, and that's why I brought in this stability time scale. So depending of what your time scale of interest is, and what is the size of the society, and what the complexity of the society, the three things: size of the system, how long you're going to monitor the system for, and how complex it is. So those three things will determine what's your best political system should be. Katya, go ahead.
I'm thinking now that I don't quite understand what are the metrics that we are optimizing. If we say that totalitarian works well on short time scale, in which sense?
Okay. That doesn't collapse, right? So it's stable. I mean, in the case of stability, like Alex said. So okay, now I have to introduce three more things from the theory of learning, right? So first is how fast it learns, so adjusted to changing environment. That's one thing. The second is how good of a loss function it gains. So how happy people are, how satisfied the system is, how long is the loss function. So the first one is how fast it learns, readjust. The second is how good like happiness of the citizen. And the third one is how stable it is. So whenever you say that some political system is better than the other, you have to answer with respect to which of those three things you are talking to. Do you want it to be easily adjusted when the environment changes? Do you want it to have people happy right now and right here? Or you want it to remain them happy for a longer period of time? So that's again, the questions you would have to answer.
Happiness, I understand. Just how we. Another question is how can we measure it? But the KPI is it's okay. How fast it learns? So what is learning? What is the loss function in this case?
Loss function is still the loss function of all people added together, right? So it's integral of a loss function of all people.
So it's about happiness.
What is it?
It's about happiness.
Yeah, well, happiness, fitness. You know, it's on different levels. We have different notions of what we call the loss function, right?
I mean, if talking about political system.
Yeah. So if you are talking about this system and you integrate it over the entire political system, then its ability to make every single citizen there happy, it tells you that the loss function for this political system is lower. And so, and that can be your objective, but then it may be unstable objective. So in the totalitarian regime, you may be able to make everybody, more or less happy, but then it would be unstable to perturbation of the environment. So environment changes, something, COVID kicks in, I don't know, something happens dramatic, you are not able to readjust to the new reality, and such a system, all of a sudden, everybody was happy and everybody starts becomes unhappy. And so that means that the system was not learning well enough, it was not adjusting to the changes in the environment fast enough. And so that can happen. With this respect, totalitarian would be horrible because it doesn't have enough degrees of freedom to change. Just knows, it works one way, and it optimizes local minima, but it doesn't know how to adjust efficiently to other situations. So that's the answer.
It's doubtful that I'm not sure if we can say that in totalitarian regime that it can makes everyone
makes-
happy.
Yeah, it makes
within
fast.
a short time.
Go ahead. Sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, even in a short time, maybe if we talk about some traditional societies, it is a different consideration. I'm not sure. I don't know. But at the moment, it sounds a bit strange that totalitarian works well, even on short time scale, because usually in such kind of systems,
You're quick to find a local minimum. Let me just rephrase it again, because we are trying to bring a language that can be useful, machine learning language, right? So you have less of the entropy, right? So less of the unknowns. You really have the few parameters that you're trying to optimize. You optimize it to the best you can, okay? And you do it right away. So because you have fewer parameters, you can really decrease, and that's a local minimum. People happy because they know that any changes will make you unhappy, right? Now, is it better to have that system or the other system where you actually have entropy, where you can go to the even better minima? Then, of course, the answer is no. You achieve your local equilibrium faster, yet you're much worse than in the other system where you have more of the entropy. This is again for people who are familiar with the annealing problem in optimization. Right, so you can, if you just go through the gradient descent, you get to local minima, and that's horrible. But if you go through the gradient descent and you add some temperature to it, you just jump around. Then you don't get stuck in local minima, and you get an even better minimum. So yeah, so generally, this is not a good strategy on larger time scales, and also for larger system, it's not a good thing. Okay, Bobby, go ahead.
Can I say?
Sure. Alex, go ahead. Yes.
So now, Alex.
Alex, yes.
Just to respond to Katya's argument, and a very good question, if I may. She says, well, she talked about happiness and so on, and I can respond to her in trying to offer her an explanation. What is the difference between totalitarian and democratic system? And you've been absolutely correct, pointing to an absolutely right direction. The totalitarian system differs from democratic system is because the totalitarian system defines and makes the definitions for you. It is the system which exactly defines happiness in terms it is useful for itself. While democratic system, you are welcome to define it the way you want. You know, that's the point. And this is one of we have a more or less democratic discussion here in this roundtable, although Vitaly is sometimes dictatorial, which I accept and understand and welcome, by the way, because it's important to channel the discussion and finish it at some point, because, you know, every time we have a discussion, it goes for hours. And I'm very lucky because every time I finish my family stuff and I join in, it's exactly my slot. So, but one more, once again, totalitarian system is the system which is in charge of definitions. It sets the definitions, it sets the cluster, it defines the general terms and conditions of your existence. While democratic system is an entropy in a sense. Just to one thing, I'm sorry, I have a party in the garden. The Germans are singing. It's a very rare event. They're normally dull and boring, but this time they decided to sing. So one more thing about my preference. I prefer monarchy. And I'm so sorry, I'm probably the only one here. George probably fell off the chair at the moment, but there you are, and he's probably not alone. Why monarchy? Because monarchy is indeed a wonderful representation of entropy. It's a wonderful representation of what, I mean, let's go just step back a little and ask each other a question. I'm sorry, I'm completely out of your language, of your power, of the conversation. But what is power? How do we define power? And in sociology, or well, in cultural history, the most important reference to power, to the nature of power, is in fact the Romans 13:1. No power but the God. The power comes from God. By other words, power is directly linked. I can actually quote, let everyone be subject of the governing authorities, if for there is no authority except that which God has established. So what does it mean essentially is that the irrational we were talking about last time, and we will talk for many more
Yeah, Alex, I don't want to talk about
Guys.
rationality, God, and ethics.
No. I'm just saying that power,
Fine.
essentially,
Let's
power,
concentrate
any
on
power.
political systems, right?
I'm just saying that power, any power, is linked directly to the irrational, to God. That's it. That's all I wanted to say. Forgive me again. I know that I'm completely
No.
out.
I will be, as you called me a dictator. I'll continue my dictatorship.
Please do.
Not because I think this is the right way to proceed, but because if I don't do that, we'll get off the track. So I will just respond to one of the comments Alex made about happiness as being defined for you in a totalitarian regimes and in a democratic, you define yourself. I don't like either of the definitions. Really, we should have, if you have to compare, to societies, we have to compare them outside of the slang that is used within the societies. And so from this point of view, I think we're still back to the old loss function and the fitness and how the society would survive. So again, surviving on different levels. At the level of organism, we call it fitness, ability to survive. And for the survival, it is important for you to learn the environment. And for the society, it's the same. If you want to survive for longer, if you want to grow into a bigger society, then this is how your loss function is defined. Again, is the integral of its individual parts. But I think I do agree. I mean, I think Alex said something similar, that basically there are fewer degrees of freedom for you overall in the society, which is democratic. There are more degrees of freedom in the society is democratic, and there are fewer degrees of freedom in the society which is totalitarian. In a monarchy, it's the same. You are minimizing the number of degrees of freedom. You're reducing the ability of individuals to do what they do. And I still argue that having too much entropy is bad, but having too little entropy is also bad. So really, there is a balance, and the balance is in exactly the ratio of the loss versus change in the entropy. So this is like temperature. How much entropy, if I add to the system, how much its unhappiness would increase, how much the loss function would increase. And so there is a balance between the two. And when we are restricting our governmental system to a particular one, monarchy, totalitarian, and democracies, we're just removing this ability to adjust and to reduce it in the number of degrees of freedom if needed, and increase if needed as well.
Just one thing to one sentence, literally, to clarify my monarchy idea. It is not because I'm an old-fashioned and wear a scarf. It's exactly because the monarchy is an acceptance and admission of an entropy into society. Because monarchical idea is idea of randomness. Someone randomly being picked up as a symbol of state, as a symbol of power. And he represents. So society, in monarchy, society accepts irrational, accepts entropy, using your word, as a factor of life. It's essentially a very humanistic organization, social organization, while in all other things, it is a democracy and so on. It's a function which produces power and is a source of power, which is, of course, fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, we may think about different monarchies, but in the monarchies that I know, the monarch is not chosen randomly at all. So that choice is not random at all. And so this type of society is not the society where entropy plays the key role. And moreover, this is not the entropy that I'm talking about. Entropy is not in choosing the one who governs, but choosing how it is governed, right? So you want to have more freedom in adjusting how things work. And again, think about your neural network, your brain, and can you imagine of having a single neuron, which is just essential for everything? You remove it and you die. That would be very inefficient. Having a single neuron that kind of so important for everybody that everybody should kind of have respect for him. That's unacceptable from the point of view of the learning system. Okay, so but the two things that we didn't discuss, and I want to go, and I think that will give us different answers. Forget about effective system. What is the most stable one? The one that is going to stay this way. People will be very unhappy, but it will stay forever. Like
monarchy is the most stable system ever produced.
And that's the problem, right? So here I'll agree. So low entropy systems are very, very stable. So totalitarian are also stable. Monarchies are more stable than totalitarian or authoritarian, because in monarchies, there is, after one monarch, another monarch comes in. And so as long as there's somebody to replace the old one, system stays. In the dictator dies, the system collapses. But in both systems, it's not an efficient learner, but it's very, very stable. It's very stable. It can stay for a long time, and yet it's not what we want. If we want the political system to actually promote the development of the society, of science, of our understanding of the universe and things like that. Bobby, go ahead. Bobby, if you turn off microphone, there's a better communication channel that would have video. Yes.
Yeah. So I love this discussion. I have a lot to say. I don't know where to start. I'll just say a few things and then let the discussion proceed, and then maybe jump in, because I think, so this is something I've been thinking about a lot and writing about, but basically I think, and it's important to mention that a lot of people didn't think that science should inform ethics or politics. Like, there's some people who are against that. I love that, you know, I joined this group to understand why the universe was a neural network, but that you were asking questions about politics. I think it's a great question, because if the story of cosmic evolution is this hierarchical story, then that's part of the story just as much as particles.
Exactly.
So, and that's my problem with like the reductionist physics mindset, is that you think those are the only things, when I think what's fundamental, in a way, it sounds paradoxical, is what's emergent. Because if the universe is a neural network, then what it's computing is in some sense more important than the components that it starts off with. So I think that principles of learning and principles that we understand regarding how nature optimizes complex adaptive systems can and should be applied to social and economic and political systems, because they are complex adaptive systems. So, you know, all of these things that people have been saying, it's really interesting, because like I see where there might be areas of disagreement, and like I can kind of see why, but it's just with language, it kind of takes a lot to explain where the problems are. So for example, it is uncomfortable to say, you know, totalitarianism may be great on short timescales, because we all hate totalitarianism. None of us wants to go to a, hopefully not, well, Alex does, but so when you say a totalitarian system, it's something that's vague. It just means there's centralized control, but there's many architectures that a totalitarian system can have. So I think the ones that work good, even on the short time scales, are totalitarian systems where someone had an architecture that they knew was robust intuitively from maybe understanding nature. And so it's not the essence of totalitarianism that sometimes works. It's the fact that it's, you know, a random theory or a theory out of other theories that happens to utilize some of these principles from that we understand that makes systems robust, or, you know, have a good social structure. So a totalitarian system can have things that a modern democratic system can't have. There can be this strong social architecture, like churches provide a lot of community that has a lot of support for people and can be useful. And so you can have a democratic system that doesn't have that, and it might not be optimal, but it's not because totalitarianism is good. It's just because that system had learning and optimization and architectural principles that the optimal democratic system would have, that it's missing. So just to wrap up, I think that, for one thing, Alex said that the monarchy was the most stable system. I don't think that's true. Again, it's the time scale thing. On a short time scale, if it has a good architecture, it can be great for society, because with centralized control, you can get a lot of stuff done. You have people with resources that they can utilize, rather than the resources being distributed and then not being able to create rockets that take people to the planet, because with communism, you know, like you could imagine that the resources are distributed. So you need this kind of balance between centralization and decentralization that you see in organisms and other biological networks. But the system has to be adaptive. That's the essence of learning, that it can change. And it needs to change because external conditions are always changing in the world. We're using up resources. So the monarchy or the totalitarian government in the long run is always going to be fundamentally bad, specifically because it doesn't adapt. And democracy, setting term limits, allows the government to change with the culture and the ideology shifts that are happening in response to external conditions. So I think we can start to outline a political system that is based on optimal learning principles, and that this could be everything for the future because it's non-ideological. It's looking at nature and being like, how can we optimize systems by being more connected, by having more variety? And it's interesting because when you look into this as a political system, there doesn't seem to be anything bad that comes from it. I mean, you could say there are some things that people are like, oh, this kind of looks like it could be bad, like progress could be associated with eugenics. But then when you probe that, you understand that eugenics movement didn't lead to progress. It actually leads to the opposite. So I'm excited in continuing this discussion with this group and maybe trying to even outline a political system that's based on optimization principles from nature.
Perfect. Thank you, Bobby. So I'm very glad you said that, because that's exactly my next question. So we discussed that, some systems are stable, like monarchy or totalitarian on the short time scales, not very stable on the long time scales. We identified that we need more trainable variables in the system, and that's why it's better to have a democracy. But is really democracy ideal? Do we really want to distribute our trainable variables equally among everyone? And so here I'm not going to say something very popular, but I might claim that democracy is also not an ideal system. And we actually can look at the structure of the trained neural networks on the hierarchy, and we can see that some neurons are more important than others. Okay, and and then you can ask, okay, what is the better spectrum of this neural network that is better learner? And the one thing that, if there's one thing that we learn from learning system, also from biology, that the spectrum has to have scale invariance. That's something that is not present in the democratic system, that is not present in the totalitarian systems, monarchies, meaning that there has to be a hierarchy, okay, but hierarchy not exponentially, like, one main persons have 3 assistants, each of 3 assistants has 3 assistants, and so forth. That doesn't work. That's exponential. The way it has to be a power law. And so it has to be, there has to be lots of layers in the connections, and there has to be also a balance between layerness, how many layers in the structure, and the width of the structure. And the correct system is actually critical system. It's close to critical. So it's really, the critical one is that allows you by, fastly readjust, basically. There were experiments, for example, with the brains when they looked at its activity, and they see that the distribution of spikes has power law dependencies, but the criticality is observed everywhere. Now, I use this physics word, so now I'm going to switch to the word that all people understand, and that's fractals, fractality. So the fractal system that we have similar structures are the ones that nature produces automatically, and that's what takes the system to be more efficient. So, and then we can use that and to look at the spectrum of connections of people in the government and then the society, and say, well, this is not good, and this is in direction where you have to establish connections. So there will be shorter connections, leading you up in the hierarchy. There should be more dynamics, social lifts and things like that. But that is something that your spectral analysis of the connections in your social system will just tell you. So this is good, this is not good. And another way of thinking about this, the political system should be a system of political system of its collection of its own copies. So I think there is one political system, and that's what invariance is. You have like one political system, then you look at the subsystem. It actually resembles exactly the same structure, but on a more smaller scale. And each of those systems has a smaller structure and its own stuff. So there's like fractality that has to be in the system. And that proved to work. So that, but none of the political system I like that, because usually there's one person comes to power, and then it creates the whole hierarchy. Not hierarchy, it creates a towel of dependencies that is centered on that one person. That's not stable. And then having like everybody equal also not good. So you really have to have, from the point of view of the theory.
Can you explain a little more about what the architecture would look like? So for example, one thing I can imagine is that the top of the hierarchy, there's not a sufficient feedback loop from the like the bottom maybe should be watching the top more, because the top is pretty much, they're not accountable to anybody.
Sure. So think about this, that in order to create a large political system that is efficient, it should be the same copy of itself on the smaller scale. So if, for example, your state system isn't a copy of your, country system, but on the smaller scale, then this is wrong, that you are kind of not giving enough power to local state, and then you are giving too much power to the federal, or other way around. So it has to be really exact copy. And then the structure of the cities has to be, smaller copies. Now I'm doing the structure, explaining to you geographically. Of course, this is not the way it should be, because we are now in the modern age of everybody's traveling everywhere, and so really the structure of it should have certain spectrum. Again, I'm using this physics word that I have to say. Basically, if you take a matrix of connections between all of the people, right, there has to have certain statistical spectral properties. And then, like you said, there's going to be more feedbacks to the top, but it's not like, if there is a lot of feedbacks to the top coming from the very bottom, that means nothing. That's democracy, actually. If you have everybody having the same voting what needs to be done. This is not correct. So this is not efficient way of making decision. Because I may be good in physics, but I'm bad in ballet dancing, right? Why would I be voting for how ballet resources should be distributed? It makes no sense, right? But I'm good in something, so I have ability to contribute to something, and that's what I should be contributing, and not having equal vote among everybody for all issues. That makes no sense from the point of view of learning theory. I'm not saying that this is something that can fly in terms of telling people, well, those are the people who will be electing president. For example, parliamentary system, right? When you elect parliament, and then parliament elects prime minister. So this is a system where at least you have two layers of complexity. But if everybody just elects a president, that this isn't so good either, because really, people are not electing by doing their research and educating themselves about a candidate by using some other unrelated judgments of the person. He made a joke on stage that I like, so I'm going to vote for him. This makes no sense at all. But yet, that's what we do, because this was the easiest to sell to people. You will all have equal rights, but I think it has to be like what you are good at. Well, do that, okay? And you will have enough contribution, but only in things that you know that you are better to the overall development of the society. So it's a more complex system.
Sorry to interrupt you. What you described now, what exactly that replicability, the grand system, the small system, everyone does exactly what he is supposed to do.
Yeah.
You describe a typical, absolutely stereotypical medieval kingdom.
Yeah.
France, Germany, England, precisely that. You have a monarch on top. You have a family, the head of the family on the bottom.
There was
have guilds. You have different people.
No learning. Sorry,
specializing.
Alex, there was no learning.
Absolutely. It was the system.
I'm telling you the spectrum of the system that you do not impose, but that you get after learning. So you do not say you are now going to be, governor of this city, and you are going to be the mayor of that city. No, or governor of the county. You are not imposing it. This is emerging to this, and it's constantly evolving. So I'm asking how it looks like in any moment of time, and then you take a snapshot of the very same system a later of time. It has the same spectrum, the same properties, and the nodes are completely different. They completely reshuffle. Because now I'm concentrating on physics research, so I should be contributing more, for making decisions that relate to physics. Now, tomorrow I decide that I'm more interested in, literature. So maybe I should be contributing more to the decision made in literature. It's a dynamical system. Yes, in any given time, if you just freeze this network and say, let it be this way, that's a horrible idea. That's the idea that has very few trainable variables. So the system has to evolve. And without that, that's a no-go.
And yet the universal man like Da Vinci, is essentially medieval phenomena. A person who switches from one to another, a person who can enter into any element, into any sphere, into any strata, into any hierarchical level of the society, is essentially a medieval phenomenon.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean. You should,
forgive me, forget it.
You should have the ability to do that. Yeah, you should not be prohibited from doing that. There should not be a divide in that you just belong to a lower class. You will always be in the lower class. But then it's up to you. It's your choice. You decide to learn more of physics, you will be a scientist. You decide to learn more of construction working, you're a construction worker. You want to learn more about business, you'll be in the business world and be making decisions that you are aware of. You will be making educationally informed decisions. The problem is with people making uneducated decisions. So you make decisions without understanding anything. You just it's as good as flipping a coin.
As soon as you know something, you stop making decisions. That's the problem. But thank you so much indeed for the comments.
What do you think about now? What we are discussing, or what you are describing, is an architecture of a state. So we have a state, and how do we organize it? What do you think? I'm trying now to understand how does it match with some libertarian ideas, for example, that let's not delegate the power to.
So when I said a state, it was a bad example. I'm not saying it's actually going to be a state. It's just a cluster of people connected who have, physicists, let's say. So that's a state. Yeah, they have some resources, they have power because they share the same knowledge. They have the same language. Remember how Alex said, have a group of people who have language that they communicate with? And if they have language, they have a better chance of actually agreeing on something. And then they have another group of people who are maybe scientists and then the artists. It's not by territorial assignment. So those substructures.
No, I didn't mean that. I mean that maybe I'm wrong, but as I take it in this consideration, we see that the system in which we delegate a lot of power to some to state
to groups. Do not delegate power to.
Yes, and libertarian ideas are about let's not delegate very few powers to the state. Yeah. And the other things we just organize on a lower level.
Yeah, so I said that's to self-organization on all levels. So it's like if you just organize it on a lower level and do not have any structure connecting that, it's good as a small system, but it's bad as a larger system. And so that smaller system will just be less competitive as a larger system. So you're trying to compare the system where you have only small organization, like maybe families, and they never collaborate with each other. And then you have another country that another system where people actually are collaborating. Families form cities. They come together and start, and that's more useful. The point is to still collaborate with others, but not to delegate, not to make decisions that you have no knowledge about. So this is the bad thing, right? So when we make decisions, take a vote about the person that we have no idea about. That's bad. That's bad for the system because it's not an educated guess, an educated vote. And so you should just be connected to people with which you have more understanding in terms of connections, your language of communicating with this person. Now, if you're trying to switch fields, right? So now you were, for example, mathematicians, you want to be economists. That's okay. You have this language of translating your ideas to there, you reconnect with the other group, and now you're contributing more to making economic decisions. Maybe you want to be environmentalist next. then you kind of learn about environment, you connect with that group, right? You can be on the same time as scientists and environmentalists, whatever you want, but education comes first. If you are able to contribute to the reducing the entropy of that subsystem, you should be part of it.
I think I agree with the approach, although I do understand why people will have criticisms. And I think anytime someone's going to put forward a new way of doing things, you're not going to be able to say everything that you want to say at one point, and it's not going to be perfect. So you're going to expect criticisms, and there's going to be a dialectic that happens. And I think the perfect system always emerges from that back and forth. Because and it's kind of the natural selection process in action. Like, you're providing variation on theories and we're giving feedback, and that's sort of this variation and selection process. But so I can see a problem with, so, what you're saying is that when people are completely uninformed about something, it doesn't make sense for them to be able to vote on it. And I think, that's important to understand, and we should go towards that. But someone might say, everyone votes because we realize that when you do it the other way, it's very easy for small groups of people who are connected, because they have that knowledge base, to essentially form power structures that want to preserve that power. And they might not even be aware that they're doing it, but they're making decisions intuitively that are influenced by this biological, tendency to try to preserve your power. So someone might argue that everyone having a vote prevents certain physiological, kind of like cancerous physiology on the level of the social organism. So, but I don't think it's a reason to be like, drop the idea. I think it's obvious that certain things lead to optimal systems. And this is one of those things where it's like, doesn't make sense to do that. But then you have to explore all of the kind of counterfactuals of what could go wrong if you don't have that. But I think it's a good approach to take all of these ideas and then go, what's bad about them? And from that, we basically refine those ideas to be, robust against criticism.
Right. Yeah. Thanks. Donald, go ahead.
Yeah. And some of the thing about having the crowd is like some of the crowd experiments they've been doing and stuff with crowd knowledge. Yes, you have a lot of, quote, stupid people in the crowd, but it balances out with the people that know, to where in the end, you still end up with the correct answers.
Yeah, but don't you want those stupid people to actually do things that they are smart about? Because every
of
stupid
course
person on earth you take knows something about something more than I do. Okay, and
exactly.
I want that stupid person to actually use her skills to do things that matter for the society, rather than doing stupid things as he's.
But this gets back to sort of a little bit what it goes back to the side that Alex, who has the Germans in his garden, Mr. Hahn, has been speaking about, in terms of, we are not logical, we are not rational, and it doesn't work. You want them to do that, yes, but
we want to become.
If they decide not to, they're not going to. and sometimes too, like you were saying that, I heard a joke about this. I heard a politician tell a joke, so therefore I will vote for him. And that again goes back to, as an engineer, I model things and I drop out variables that I think are unimportant, but sometimes they are. And sometimes that person is perceiving a personality aspect of that person that they are more nuanced in perceiving. So their, quote, dumb idea to vote for that person, actually, they've got more knowledge in that, and they perceive something in that person that they see as good. So therefore they go for it. And for better or for worse, that's who your leader ends up being. There might be an aspect about him. I mean, here I sit in the States, and we've had numerous presidents over the last number of years, and each one of them has had good and bad. And, you know, I have my opinions on each one and other people have their opinions on each one. But every single one of them has done terrible stuff and every single one of them has done good things for the country. It's just where you fall on what you think is better for the country and what that person thinks for the country is how you fall into the decision.
Okay.
And
Don, can I?
Yes.
So sorry.
I'm getting off. I know.
I really liked your idea about explaining, putting the head of the stupid person and trying to figure out why is that person voted for such and such president, right? And how can we make that stupid person even happier? So I think the reason he voted for him because of the joke is because he thought that they have the same sense of humor. And if they do have the same sense of humor, maybe they are similar. And so maybe they of that person would actually be much closer to my ideas. Okay,
exactly.
Let's take that stupid person and let's give him a choice of actually many people. The one who is funny and actually works in the field of the stupid person. Okay, and then the one who just makes stupid jokes and knows nothing about in the field that he is.
Of course.
He will choose the one who is working in his field. It's even closer to him, right? And then let's continue doing that until we find for that stupid person, in quotation mark, nobody should be offended, that matches best for what this person thinks this person in power should have. And that is exactly creating this cluster, the lower level cluster, where I dedicate my vote to a person who I think has similar to me opinions, but who knows more about, say, politics or physics or art. Okay, and then by doing this, I've just given my vote directly to a president, but to the person who I know more about, who I think he shares more of my values and my ideas, and that's less democratic. I dedicated my vote, but I would give it to him, and maybe he will give it back to me for when we are voting for something else that he thinks not, I'm funny and I also good in something else. So and then by redistributing my votes to those not just only who you think have something in common with you, but also have more knowledge in something that the vote will go for. I think that's the point of this. So really, just not concentrate on a joke, but dig deeper. And each person should dig deeper. Maybe if we are making votes about how to make a new comedy channel, then I will actually give my vote to the person who is the funniest. But if we're making a decision of whether go to war with some country or not, maybe funny is not the right thing. Maybe I should really listen whether he understands consequences.
Yeah, I think some of the problem is you can't distill down to that final person because now your system becomes way too big. So these people are voting for some semblance and you can't restrict them from the vote because that makes them unhappy.
How about that? You give app to them, and then this app is okay. Now the government has to vote how to distribute certain resources, and I have no idea about how it should be distributed. But let me give a choice of who I should dedicate give my vote for. Who should be voting for me? And I have a list of people who I can listen to, and they will describe their ideas, but which will connect me to them, make me trust them more. Maybe they will be doing jokes. Maybe they will tell about their experience in the war zones. I don't know, whatever it is that
I guess one of the things that I haven't been able to express is it depends on the person's interest. Like you said, people should be able to do what they're really good at. Well, people are good at what they're interested in.
Yeah, exactly.
So people that are uninterested in politics, if you take away their vote, they will be angry. But if you force them to vote for something they don't want to, they get angry.
How about
they don't like that? There's a repulsion from that.
How about I take away them vote for president, but I give them a vote for how the money should be distributed in their field of interest of where they are working. Will they
possibly?
Yeah. Okay.
So you might have an angle there.
Yeah. So there is flexibility, and that's learning. That's how learning.
Yep.
Right?
When you say take it away, it sounds kind of harsh when you're like, take it away. What if the solution to your 2 points was that you allow people to vote whatever they want, but they have to demonstrate some interest or knowledge And they can do that by showing that they've researched the topic. For example, jury duty really disturbs me that some people aren't trained in logical reasoning and completely get manipulated by the lawyers into things like that person's more like me, or whatever you can do to manipulate them to feeling empathy for that person. Casey Anthony, for example, I think she got off on that murder case because of the way she looked and she seemed very innocent. So is the solution that not everybody can vote on everything, but that everyone has the opportunity to do so if they demonstrate interest or knowledge?
Yeah, I'm against tests. Against tests for the very simple, easy reason. ChatGPT will win against all of us, right? In all of the tests. So then we are really not going to test and also studying for the test is a terrible idea. We will discuss education actually. The next time, how will also relevant for education, but I don't think testing is the right thing. But self-evaluating, so let's say you have 100% of your vote power. You can say, I want to, for yourself, I will use all 100 for voting for a president and I'm done with this politics for the next 4 years. Or say, I'm going to use only 20% of my vote to a president, the other 20% to making decision of who's going to be, allocating the money for war, another 60% for education. And that means that I feel like for myself that I'm more knowledgeable about science. And I think it's more important for me to control how this money go. And so I want to be making more decision in that direction. And that's it. And
okay, everybody's allocated the same amount of voting power. They just get to choose where they apply it. And that will motivate people to go towards the stuff that they're more knowledgeable about.
Exactly.
That's
and
cool.
Moreover, it will motivate them to actually learn some stuff, because really, it's either just taking a coin or really I know something. Let me use it.
You don't want to waste it. It's like spending your money. You don't want to spend your money on something you know nothing.
Exactly. Yaroslav, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add something to your idea of dedication of the vote to somebody who is acknowledged in some field. And my point is that you can even implement this idea in the true democracy, because you just can listen to somebody who is acknowledged and just vote for something that he told you. And but the problem is just people don't do that.
Right. No, but we are trying to address that problem. Exactly. So smarter people do exactly that, and others don't do that. They just listen to how politicians look, how they talk. And of course, the politicians are the stupidest people of all, right? So their IQ level is very low. We all know about that. And yet we vote for them because we don't want to do that job, right? And so, okay, you do this, you seem like funny. And that's a horrible way of actually voting. I think if we'll make it more educated vote and decision making, more flexible, then I think this will be a better system of this and more flexible.
So what I mean is that the problem is not in democracy, and it's the problem is how people use democracy.
The problem with the stupidity, but this is the problem we're trying to resolve, because it is always stupidity that kills, right? Knowledge is what makes the political system is smarter. Stupidity what makes political system stupider. Entropy makes it stupider when you make random decisions, and then educated decision makes it smarter. And so this is kind of what we are trying to balance the two things. Okay.
Well, but those are assumptions which you postulate. Essentially, those are your norms. Those are your assumptions. I would not agree with that. I would not agree that knowledge makes you smarter. Knowledge has nothing to do with your ability to reason. Let's agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. So
I think whatever education, whatever amount of knowledge you give to people, knowledge doesn't produce motivation. Knowledge, in fact, decreases motivation.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
So, you say, listen, Vitaly, you say very important things, and you postulate them in an absolutely categorical way. I would not agree with that.
No, that's not what I do. Let me just reply to knowledge. When I said knowledge in this way, I meant not just a collection of data that you have about whatever, like ChatGPT is very knowledgeable, but ability to actually use this to,
and also desire to exercise.
And that what we already went through this. It's what I call consciousness, the ability to learn. So there is learning is just, can be memorization, or you take some environment and you're trying to model it. So the ability to model it well is exactly what intellect is. And I think you are absolutely right. There is a difference between just knowledge and the intellect. Those are two different things. However, very often in the discussions when we discuss something else, I would refer to both of those things as knowledge. I know it's not precise, but both of those things, knowing information about the environment and being able to process this information, there's two different things. And they actually have two different things mathematically defined. So one, knowledge is the value of the loss function, and the other one, intellect, is how fast you can learn given the new data. And so they're two different things. And I think that's one of the things that we often argue with you, but about definitions, right? So I'll try to be more careful when next
No,
time.
you use a very specific language, which is exactly what the part of the discussion which I missed, where you discussed that there are specific languages for social sciences, there's specific languages for mathematics science, for physics and so on. But I mean, the general trend is that with the increase of knowledge, intellect declines, strangely enough. And if you look at the socio-economic analysis over the last 100 years, you can see that the depth of involvement, of social activity, of social activism, drops. And especially with internet, which is a remarkable phenomenon. And we need to study that in some details or talk about it. How can it be that now, over the last 20 years, knowledge is absolutely widespread, while social activism declines and in decrease?
That's a different phenomena. Yeah, this is a different social phenomenon that we can discuss, right? So why are people less interested in politics? And maybe because of exactly what we discussed before, they don't feel like their vote matter, and they don't feel like they are part of this system. And once you give them more involvement into the system by doing this allocated vote, where you, for yourself, you decide what are you good at, and then that's where you direct.
And the last thing I wanted to say, you and I, we grew up in Soviet Union. What was the most important thing in Soviet Union? Was the most valuable thing? Information, access to information. Now we all have the access to information. We thought that as soon as we have an information, we will be able to assume control over our existence, of our social dynamics, and so on and so forth. Wrong. Everything is wrong.
Well, I disagree with that. I think information is you can only make a model of the environment by receiving information from it.
I'm saying it's not enough. Information alone, it's not enough. There should be something else there.
And your learning capabilities, as we discussed. So the one thing is information that you get from the environment, and the other one, how you process this information, how you make the decision based on the information that you receive. But this is applicable not only to people, it's applicable for any learning system, from society down to the fundamental. Guys, this was the longest meeting so far, 2 hours, 15 minutes or so. That was great. Any final thoughts, remarks? Oh, Katya, of course. Yes, Katya should wrap it up.
I'm sorry, maybe you already answered, maybe I missed something, maybe you already answered that before, but when you told about the stupidity of the politicians, there is a question, how we get some smart people into political, because if
okay, I think
one who is smart is busy in physics, then
no, I think it's natural selection. The reason why politicians are stupid, because this is the skill that they needed to get votes, right? You make stupid jokes, you are closer to, you don't want to be that deep, right? You don't want to come up with the deep thoughts, or you want to be funny, you want to be charismatic, but that's about it. So the skills that make you a good politician are not the skills that are needed for people to make the decisions, unfortunately. And so there's two contradictory things.
But how to deal with that?
Oh, and that's what I'm saying. So in this aspect, when you do not vote blindly, but you make educated votes, right? So when you have, let's go back to this example. You have 100% of your vote, and you can decide for yourself, where do you want to contribute? Maybe you want to allocate all this vote just to local city, right? And you don't care about anything else, so don't. So then all of your power of the weight of your vote will go to that. Maybe you want to allocate this vote to controlling how the money are distributed for the warfare or for the science. Then you allocate your vote there. You decide where you want to allocate. Now you will not going to be wasting this vote on some funny people, right? Because now all of a sudden this vote matters directly to what matters to you. So you would not be wasting just because somebody made a fine joke. Because for now, voting is like, oh, it doesn't matter. I mean, I can vote for this or for that. I don't even know those people on the ballots, and I don't care who they are. And we want to change that. We want to make sure that the vote that you make, because every person is smart. Every person has some skills that other people don't have. We just don't use that skill to create a hierarchy of a political system. If every single one of us use that exactly skill of what they're good at in creating the right hierarchy, then that would be a perfectly functioning political system, right? And yet we are by design making that not be the case, and that's why people with bad intentions come to power, because we can all be actors. I can pull my mask on and pretend that I'm like the friendliest guy ever, and then I care about every single person on earth and then the birds and everything, and then I can come to power and change completely. We know many examples of politicians doing that. And so then I don't know much about this person. Why would I be voting for that person? I should be voting only in the directions where I'm expert at, what I think I'm good at. So, and that's where I can make most educated decisions. So that was the vague idea. But also the outcome of this would be a scale-free. So I think it will be a scale-free and dynamical system. So we can, for example, what we can do, we can just take a snapshot of the social connections, make a spectral analysis of that, and say how bad a given system is. It will be horrible. There will be few nodes, lots of connections to the nodes, and it will be really bad in terms of mathematics. The matrix will have very low rank. It will be a horrible system for anyone. Now, yes, democracy will be better than totalitarian, but still not perfect. Bobby, go ahead.
Yeah, just wanted to wrap up, ask you a question that I need for my article. But on that point, I just want to ask, it sounds like you can kind of define an optimal model for information processing network, then model the US, let's start off smaller, as it is with all its connections between government, however detailed you want to go, and that you can actually compare what's optimal. I thought giving the optimal thing would be hard, and I know not everybody's going to agree, but it sounds like you have a pretty good idea of optimal, I guess, network effects, computational power.
You can do it simpler. You can just give me the matrix that you just described of connections, and I'll just tell you which way it should evolve. Don't make any sudden moves, right? How should connections evolve? To which connections should become stronger, softer, and then you can test right away whether this makes the system functioning better. And it doesn't have to be applied to countries, companies, right? The idea of centralized company where there's like CEO who is like the decision maker, the main person, like almost a god, like take Tesla, right? It's a horrible idea. I mean, it works great on the short time scale, but then the lifetime of any company is what, 30, 40 years? Because the person who actually built it goes away and that's it, it dies. And so so it doesn't have to be tested. This type of things don't have to be tested on the scale of the countries. You don't want to risk that. But even or any society, like a level of any society, any social system, sorry, it can be tested, right? So you can start with a city. For example, how does the city function, or how the state, how company, things like that. And then you can say, well, here's an advice. This is what you should do. Those are the connections that are missing. Okay, you don't have enough feedback from the average people, or you have too much feedback from the average people, and you should not listen to them. They're just giving you wrong information.
And we could be doing this right now. Like this could be a project that someone's doing.
Right. Well, we are doing it right now. This is a social system. If you haven't noticed, we are running an experiment right now. And the one thing that Alex was completely correct pointing out, that in the beginning, this is a very totalitarian system, our little group. And that's horrible. I hate it. But this is what has to be on a short time scale. Okay. And then ideally, I should just go away gradually, start speaking less and less, and then it will become completely decentralized system that will evolve, hopefully. But we'll see how it goes.
Okay, yeah, the final question is, yeah, thanks for letting me join your group and talk today. So basically, what I argued in my book is that life is part of this cosmic evolution process, and you get this hierarchical emergence, and that the emergent stuff matters. So I also talk about how the biosphere is this integrated information processing network that is very robust because it's always creating new copies of organisms and evolving. And it seems like there's this trend. Ray Kurzweil at least believes that there's this trend of complexification that keeps going. And a lot of people at the Santa Fe Institute believe this. A lot of people have talked about this. Freeman Dyson, physicist, neuroscientist, Christoph Koch, Stuart Kaufman, complexity theorist. So I came to believe that basically life is spreading as a sort of inevitable process. It's statistical. Any civilization can fail, but overall, it spreads because it's learning and it's robust, and that's just how evolution works. It's kind of like an AI, compared life to like a neural network that's learning. You say the universe is a neural network. So what I'm wondering is life emerging and spreading part of the computation of the universe's neural network, this microscopic neural network? And should we expect learning to continue such that the universe is self-organizing into basically a fully integrated computational system?
Eventually. And we've seen it here on Earth, right? So first there were some just particles, atoms merged into the molecules, molecules merged into cells, cells merged into the multicellular organism. Then we are trying to merge into more sophisticated social system. That goes on and that continues on, and that's the tendency. And by doing this, we are basically decreasing the entropy, our uncertainty about the universe. We are learning the universe more, and so that's the general tendency. Why does the universe is such that it likes to learn itself so much? Well, that may be a more philosophical question we can discuss later, but that's what's happening. It's every single part of the universe seems to be learning everything else. And the more we're collaborating, the more powerful as a learning system we are. And that's why I keep emphasizing, like, if we manage to create this trace transition and create a language of communicating between different branches, if we can do that, then this whole social experiment will indicate that we've made this phase transition. Now we are a super intelligence, right? So we are super intelligence where individual nodes are moderately intelligent people, but as together we are a lot more intelligent. And so, that's the tendency, yes. And how it will go on after this phase transition, I don't know. I don't know if this phase transition will be before we destroy ourselves. That's also, there's a danger.
But
right?
if we do, you think the emergences will continue, or could it be that life does that? There's the great filter theory, which I don't subscribe to, but basically that would say that learning ends if life always intelligent life always destroys itself.
There are too many attempts, right? So I mean, we fail here on Earth. Yeah,
statistically there will be a success.
Yeah, there'll be a success. There'll definitely be success. It's useful for the learning, and even if we die out, that is because it was useful for somebody else, right? We're not going to be draining the resources. So I don't know who will be the next leader of the biosphere, but for now we are, and so we feel responsible. We know the most, and we should try to create this super intelligent system that can. But for now, we cannot even create a political system that is good enough. Horrible, right? So we are just now talking about things, and yeah, education is first. That's why at some of the meetings, probably next time, we'll talk about education, because without education, you cannot create a people who are actually be contributing to this super intelligence, and then this phase transition will fail. Anyways, it's way past our 2-hour limit. It was a great pleasure discussing all this. It was lots of fun. We started slow with physics, and then eventually languages, and politics just kicked off. Everybody started making fun of politicians, which was fun. Thank you so much, guys. It was a pleasure. We'll see you next week. We'll have a lot more fun questions to discuss. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.